Hello, everybody. Let's start the plenary sessions with Zambezi News.
nicht nur profitiert hat, sondern von zwei Dingen, von zwei Elementen ausgezeichnet ist. Erstens von der Einwanderung in unser Land und zweitens davon, dass der Wohlstand und die Möglichkeit zur Gerechtigkeit in Deutschland alleine davon abhängt, dass dieses Land global offen ist, dass es Handel treibt mit vielen, vielen Partnern und dass es genau, weil es wirtschaftlich etwas zu sagen hat, sich auch der gemeinsamen Probleme anzunehmen hat. Das ist mir wichtig zu betonen in einer Zeit, in der Migration und Flucht von vielen in allererster Linie als ein Problem gesehen wird. Wenn Sie ein wenig in die Geschichte der Bundesrepublik schauen, ein bisschen weiter zurück, dann sehen Sie, um ein Beispiel zu nennen, was den Nahen Osten angeht, die letzten, die den römischen Limes gegen die anstürmenden Horden der Hunnen verteidigt haben, waren syrische Bogenschützen. Daran können Sie sehen, wie viel unsere sogenannte westliche Zivilisation einem Ansatz verdankt, der nicht auf Nationalstaatlichkeit beruht hat. Sie dürfen dieses Beispiel auch in Bayern erwähnen, die Reaktionen sind dann etwas lebhafter. Meine Damen und Herren, ich habe Ihnen gesagt, im ersten Block schauen wir 5, 6 Minuten auf das, was die staatliche Zusammenarbeit angeht. Aber neben der staatlichen Zusammenarbeit möchte ich gerade hier in diesem Saal betonen, wie wichtig daneben Zusammenarbeit von zivilgesellschaftlichen Organisationen ist. Und möchte darüber hinausgehen, über das, was Sie jetzt erwarten, dass es natürlich einen Dialog G20 mit der Zivilgesellschaft gibt. Es geht mir um was anderes. Wenn es stimmt, dass staatliche Souveränität weder ausreicht, mit den wirtschaftlichen Folgen von Globalisierung umzugehen, noch ausreicht, Sicherheit auf dem eigenen Staatsgebiet zu gewährleisten. Und ich glaube, die aktuellen Entwicklungen des Terrorismus haben das in allen Ländern gezeigt. Wenn das stimmt, dann gibt es danach zwei Wege. Es gibt einen Weg, den beschreiten Populisten aller möglichen Sorten und die sagen, vereinfacht gesprochen, wenn wir schon weniger zu sagen haben, dann sollen wenigstens weniger etwas zu sagen haben. Das sind dann die Leute, die kulturelle Souveränität verteidigen und die behaupten, wenn man schon wirtschaftliche Souveränität verliert, wenn man politische Souveränität verliert, dann will man wenigstens die kulturelle Souveränität haben und bestimmen können, wer gehört dazu und wer gehört nicht dazu. Man kann auch einen anderen Weg gehen. Einen Weg, den wir versuchen zu gehen für das, was wir an Außenpolitik machen, den aber in einem viel entschiedeneren Maße Sie alle schon gehen. Es geht darum, dass wir als Deutsche, dass wir als Europa in einem Wettbewerb der Narrative ein Angebot zu machen haben. Ein Angebot, was besonders hier im Saal betont sei, auf Meinungsfreiheit beruht, das ein bestimmtes Verhältnis von Staat und Religionsgemeinschaften voraussetzt, das in den ersten 20 Artikeln des Grundgesetzes beschrieben ist. Und es ist nicht beschrieben im Sinne einer Gebrauchsanweisung, sondern das Grundgesetz ist ein Gesetz, das heißt, es entspricht nicht der Wirklichkeit. Ansonsten würden Sie eine Gebrauchsanweisung kaufen und kein Grundgesetz, sondern es ist in dem Gegensatz zwischen Realität und der normativen Aufforderung, eine andere Welt zu schaffen, zu lesen und insofern eben auch immer wieder in der Praxis des Lebens zu aktualisieren. Und wir können stolz darauf sein, was wir erreicht haben. Aber wir sollten auch nicht vergessen, dass auch in diesem Land noch vor 30 Jahren Frauen Kopftücher anziehen mussten, weil es als unschicklich galt, auf die Straße zu gehen. Dass bis in die 70er Jahre Frauen ihre Männer fragen mussten, ob sie denn Geld ausgeben durften. Und dass vielleicht sogar noch länger eine Liebesverbindung zwischen Katholiken und Protestanten lange nicht in allen Landschaften der Bundesrepublik gut angesehen war. Das nur als Beispiel. Es ist dasselbe Grundgesetz, aber es ist eine ganz andere Gesellschaft, die sich auf dasselbe Grundgesetz berufen kann, weil es eben den Raum dafür lässt, dass sich in einem gesellschaftlichen Kampf andere Haltungen durchsetzen und eine Modernisierung einer Gesellschaft möglich ist. Deswegen ist es so wichtig, überhaupt einmal zu verstehen, welche Träume und Traumata, welche Hoffnungen und Befürchtungen andere Gesellschaften haben. Und lieber Herr Limburg, wenn die Deutsche Welle heute in über 30 Sprachen präsent ist, wenn Sie alleine im arabischen Raum 300.000 Abonnenten haben für Deutsche Welle Arabic, 200.000, und wenn Sie damit aufschließen zur internationalen Konkurrenz, dann ist das in erster Linie ein Angebot an unsere Freunde und Partner in der Welt, sich mit dem auseinanderzusetzen, was Deutschland ist, und die Möglichkeit zu haben, einen anderen Blick auf die Welt zu bekommen, als wenn Sie, ohne jetzt Konkurrenzunternehmen der Deutsche Welle zu nennen, als wenn Sie, sagen wir, einen chinesischen oder einen russischen Sender hören. Und insofern ist es uns sehr recht und es ist unsere Aufgabe, Ihre Arbeit dabei zu unterstützen, weil wir überzeugt sind, wir haben ein Angebot zu machen, was ein anderes ist als das unserer Freunde und Partner. Und das ist ein fairer Wettbewerb und ein Wettbewerb, den wir zusammen annehmen wollen. Und das geht, und damit möchte ich schließen, das geht politisch nur, wenn wir nicht auf die Repräsentation von Staatlichkeit in unserer Arbeit setzen, sondern wenn wir darauf vertrauen, dass wir mit Strukturen und Partnern in den Ländern unserer Freunde zusammenarbeiten, die ähnliche Ansätze haben, die die gegenseitige Freiheit schützen und die gemeinsam mit uns in ihren Ländern Angebote machen wollen. Und deswegen ist es uns unter Bezug auf Afrika so wichtig, dass die Deutsche Welle Partnerschaften eingeht, dass sie ihr eigenes Angebot verbindet mit dem enormen Wissen, mit der Kreativität und der Leidenschaft von Journalistinnen und Journalisten in anderen Ländern. Deswegen haben wir jetzt für meinen Bereich gesprochen, in der Kulturpolitik in den letzten 3 Jahren unseren Ansatz umgestellt und fördern zunehmend Empowerment-Plattformen im Filmbereich mit Makolonet, gemeinsam mit einer großen deutschen Stiftung, im Musikbereich mit Music in Africa, aber auch im Bereich der Kunst. Deswegen wollen wir in den kommenden Jahren viel, viel enger auch zusammenrücken mit unseren französischen Freunden. Denn 2 Länder, die ungefähr die Einwanderungszahl einer chinesischen Provinz haben, können doch nicht behaupten, dass die Welt darauf wartet, dass sie sich als europäische Nationalstaaten da draußen auch noch in den nächsten 20 Jahren erklären sollen. Wenn wir ein europäisches Verständnis haben wollen, dann müssen wir es gemeinsam entwickeln. Und dazu, lieber Herr Limburg, und damit möchte ich abschließen, und dazu ist uns die Deutsche Welle im Konkurrenzverhältnis zu anderen, mit den Kooperationen, die sie mit unseren Freunden in der Welt eingehen, ein Vorbild und ein Ansporn. Vielen Dank.
Dr. Görgen, I'm quite happy that you ended on the note that Deutsche Welle is important to the Foreign Ministry. That's very good to hear. My name is Edith Kimani. I am late, well, I was late, and I could blame it on my African timing, and I will. But apologies for that. And just to touch on what Dr. Görgen said, he said that, you know, we require partnerships as this world, and that's exactly what we're going to be discussing right now. And these are partnerships between government, the private sector, the civil society. But the question we're asking is the international community aiming towards common goals? You did mention that Germany's aim this year as a G20 host is to increase and intensify international cooperation, especially in this polarized world. And I'll be asking my panelists, is this at all possible? It looks like the seats are now ready, and therefore allow me to introduce my distinguished panel. Mr. Gonzalo Lobo Xavier? I knew I would get this wrong. He's a Vice President of Communication representing civil society at the EESC. Thank you for joining us. Yes, please. We also have Nick Nuttall, who's a spokesperson for the Executive Secretary, working under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Thanks for joining us. Yep. Veronica Puncheva is also joining us. She's a Senior Vice President, Corporate Responsibility at Metro Group. And finally, we have Mr. Salil Shetty. He is the Secretary General for Amnesty International. Thank you for joining us. Mr. Shetty, I'm going to begin with you. When we talk about international cooperation, I think at AI you have the unique perspective of seeing the world from a bird's eye view. How would you rate it in 2017? Is the world really communicating with each other as it should? The microphone is right next to you.
Thank you, Edith. Only you can do this. Even before we sit down, we say, hello, how are you? In Nairobi, we would spend 10 minutes asking how are the goats and the cows and the farms.
No, we're getting right into it.
Get straight into it. Okay, very good. I look forward. First of all, thank you to Peter and the German government. And it's a great pleasure and privilege to be here today and to meet so many journalists of Deutsche Welle who are in far-flung areas. Some of them are taking huge risks. And I decided to come here today, just if you give me 30 seconds, to say that journalists today are under attack in so many parts of the world. And we really appreciate what Deutsche Welle and many of you are doing in places like Turkey and Ethiopia, places where you're under attack. So keep up the good work and thank you very much. So without further ado, I think, it's a very important question, and I was really happy that the theme of the conference is framed around identity and diversity, because the question you're asking is intimately related to the identity and diversity issue. So if you say, how are we doing in terms of global cooperation, I guess we can't really answer that question without looking at, because what is global if it's not its constituent parts, which are the countries and the member states? Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is that we're not in a great place right now. So many countries are going through such a difficult time. And if you ask me as to why we're in this situation, because the consequence of this situation in these countries is that there's no question that we're not at a time in history where global cooperation, it's great we're having the G20 here shortly, but it is a moment of great global conflict, not great global cooperation, if you ask me. So, and the reasons why we've led to this situation, in my view, is that, this is decades of just bad governance. I mean, we have country after country which has been misgoverned with unethical leadership, both in the governments and in the private sector. Consequently, we have massive increase in inequality, and so, and failing institutions. So we have a situation where countries are divided, deeply divided, and I'm not even talking about just the governments, but societies are deeply divided. And we have politicians in so many countries who have used the opportunity of these rather legitimate grievances of globalization not really helping everybody. They've fished in troubled waters. They've used the politics of demonization. They've made the world into us versus them. So the us could be women, they could be LGBT activists, they could be Muslims, they could be refugees. They don't actually really care who the them is. It just works because they get the votes. Once you divide people, it's easier because you can't get votes by saying positive things. It's much easier to do kind of fear-mongering. So I'm afraid that I want to start with a rather grim picture in a very practical sense. What's happened is human rights are in a free fall. The consequence of this is that, we have at least 22 countries in the last year alone where people have been killed for standing up, just peacefully raising issues of dissent. And that's kind of the extreme form, but this kind of attack on NGOs, on anybody, journalists we know. I mean, Turkey is a great example because we say that where do you have to go if you want to meet a journalist in Turkey? It's very easy, just go to jail. They're all there in one place.
Right, so seeing as Mr. Shetty has taken us into a dark path, let's stay there. Gonzalo, does this mean then that the review frameworks are not working because there's so many institutions globally which have been created to tackle with the things that Salil is talking about? Where are we going wrong?
Well, that's $1 million question, and I don't have $1 million answer for that. Let me say before I answer directly to you that I'm here representing the European Economic and Social Committee, and for the first time very proud to be a strategic partner of the Global Media Forum. For us, this is the right place to communicate and to share the values of the organized civil society in Europe. And yes, we are very privileged in Europe. Where are we going with this? Well, I'm an optimistic but I'm also a realistic person. I think we have been achieving a lot of interesting goals by defining an agenda. We have now an agenda. We have now agreed, most of the countries, most of the civilized world, whatever that means, agreed on targets, agreed on common good. And I think that's a great achievement. So I try to believe that if we have a good agenda, if we have objectives, if we have goals, if we have people engaged, if we have the organized civil society communicating, cooperating, and prepared to deal with the problems, with the challenges, I think we are going to somewhere that will be good for everybody. Of course, this is only, you might think, oh, is the only one who's wearing a tie? Is from Brussels? This is mumbo jumbo. No, that's. Well, yeah, well, actually, I did my best to use one with the same color of the European Economic and Social Committee, but that's not the point. The point is that what I'm trying to say is that we have good examples. We have best practices around the world on having solutions for the citizens. And this is a message of hope. Of course, there's challenges like what it was said, not also by the government, but German government. The challenges are so huge and are so different, even just across the borders. And of course, we don't have one single answer for every problem. But the solution, I have no doubt, is using the abilities of the society, the cooperation between countries, the ability to work together for a better solution. Once again, this is not rhetoric. I will end my participation on this time with an example. I'm coming from Portugal. We had this weekend a tremendous tragic fire that devastated 64 people, and of course this is something unbelievable in the 21st century. How could it happen? But the dimension of the solidarity just after this crisis gives me hope and shows that the society is prepared to react. And even the countries are prepared to react, because immediately we got help from our foreign country, our neighbors, and it was amazing. Of course, that this shouldn't happen. We don't need tragic effects to address the best of each population, of each citizen, but it's a fact, and it's a message of hope.
Right. Speaking of individual countries, Nick, this, we set global agenda, but it's down to the states to commit to implementing these things. What happens when countries decide they're not going to follow through? Should we have a mechanism of punishing those countries? Because it looks like naming and shaming is not working, and I'm speaking specifically now to climate change.
Yeah, okay. So is this working? Yes, it is. Maybe just backtracking a little bit on this, it's a bit like maybe Charles Dickens with Tale of Two Cities. It's the best of times, it's the worst of times. It's a question of where you put your lens. I mean, my friend here is seeing it through the lens of Amnesty International, so I really have to talk through the lens of the environment and the sustainable development. If you'd asked me this question 10 years ago, I would have been very depressed, a little bit like my colleague is here. I'm not depressed right now, though. I think there's a really strong sense of global cooperation on both the climate change challenge and also on the sustainability overall challenge. When I say it's the worst of times, the best of times, or the best of times, the worst of times, it's because we are very late in the game of actually dealing with these challenges. They've been building for a long time, and we've got the agreements now in place since 2015 to move forward. To answer your question more specifically, what I think is very different about cooperation now than perhaps a few years ago was it was all put on the nation state to deliver the goods. It was all put on the nation state to actually achieve the pledges and promises that were handed out. But I think if you look at the story of the Paris Climate Change Agreement, it's not a chain anymore of national governments where if one government falls out of the chain, the entire thing breaks. This is now a web that's deeper and further and wider, bringing in so many more actors. If you look at the movement of the cities, of the states, of the regions, you know, there are so many alliances. My boss, Cristiano Figueres, my boss, Patricia Espinosa, is right now in Austria with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and they set up a thing called R20, which is about regions cooperating. There's something called the Under 2 Coalition, which Jerry Brown is involved in, California, but also North Rhine-Westphalia, and something like 160 cities and regions around the world with a GDP that is 1/3 of the global GDP, with targets to cut their emissions by 80% by 2050. You look at the reaction to President Trump announcing that he was withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. The reaction of every world leader was disappointment, some was anger, but none of it was like, okay, now we're giving up. And you look at the reaction in the United States with the cities, Pittsburgh, for example, who said, actually, we want to be a green city. Don't single us out as being in the Rust Belt. We're a green city. California, New York, I mean, you know, you look around the States and you look beyond and you look at the business sector as well. Because what's different about now versus the past was, in the past it was like, what do you have to give up to save the planet? And nobody knew quite how much they'd have to give up. Also politically it was quite hard to sell. But we're now living in a world where solar power is almost as competitive as coal, in some countries already is. Wind power is cheaper than coal. I mean, these are awesome seismic changes that are happening in things like energy around the world. So as a result, people want to cooperate on this and want to cooperate across regions, across territories, across cities, across new kinds of alliances, and across governments too. So I'm less pessimistic about that, but maybe it's different with human rights, right? I mean, I don't want to question that issue. But on the sustainability issue, I've never seen this level of cooperation in the world. And I've been involved in this in the UN for nearly 20 years, and a journalist covering the environment and science for another nearly 20 years. And I've never seen this level of cooperation and understanding.
Seismic changes, you've called them. Veronica, I still want to insist on the question I had asked earlier, because we now see new challenges evolving and coming into the world. So how do we deal with the powerful countries who are not towing the line? How do we create restraint? When you look at what happened with the annexation of Crimea, for example, what can the global community do as a result of that?
Well, I think I'll be strongly not in my place to talk about Crimea out of a corporate position. Although I used to work in Ukraine, and Crimea is not just a geographic word for me, but is colleagues, customers, stores, something beyond that geographic word. So you really hit the point at it. In terms of what we as a business can do, because we are working in 35 countries. So, of course, regulation matter, regulation help. And we as big business, because working with in 35 countries with more than 20 million every day, 20 million customers every day, and with more than 200 people as our employees, is a part of a web, as Nick said. And I believe that we can see ourselves as a part of a web of positive change. And we see this cooperation absolutely essential, because the discussion and actually the implementation of the policies happens in the business. It doesn't happen somewhere else. It happens in the business and in the daily life of people. So your fellow colleagues, journalists in these countries, ask us this question every day. What do you do really to show this positive change? And in that matter, cooperation is absolutely essential. For us, cooperation, international cooperation, is the name of the game. We brought companies from all over the world to new geographies where they didn't know how to get their goods. And without this cooperation with these companies, we would not be there. Our customers will not be satisfied. And indeed, the social element is more complicated than environmental. Not environment is easy. And we had the opportunity, together with Nick's boss, Ms. Espinosa, to have this discussion 2 weeks ago in New York during the climate change session in the Ocean Conference in New York. Yes, we commit to environmental and sustainability targets, but we also commit with our code of conduct, what we say to our partners, what we expect them to do, also to the social. We say very clearly what our expectations are. How do we want people to be treated, or how do we don't want people to be treated? Today in Berlin starts a very big forum. It's called Consumer Goods Forum. And if you talk to the powerful people, these are really the most powerful companies in the world on the retail and manufacturing side. And we will announce that we want to be part of the social agenda in a way that we are co-chairing the social pillar. So it happens on the both sides with commitment, with understanding. And let's be clear, it's not a marathon. It is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And I believe we've seen this. You had the chance to work for Metro in many countries. This change really happening together with the business and with the policy. But it's not easy game.
Not easy. Salil, I want to come back to you with that. We're talking about partnerships, and I'm really glad that we're all from different sectors here. But are we seeing, that string of the web, as you called it, of partnerships running through problem solving? So are we seeing, for example, private businesses, NGOs, even universities and research centers coming together to create global solutions?
Well, I mean, one can always find examples, right? Good examples. I can reel off 3 or 4 great examples of partnership and all of these kind of buzzwords. But I just to both Nick and Gonzalo, I wouldn't it's not a question of whether we're being optimistic or depressed or we're on drugs or whatever, I think that's not where we are. The question is, what are people feeling? And people are feeling angry. There's no, you can talk about it in any way you want. You can spin it. But the fact is, people are angry, and that anger has resulted in shocking outcomes. Some of those outcomes are electoral, some of those outcomes are bloody. So, I mean, if you're talking about global cooperation, the last 6 years, Syria has been melting down in front of us as we speak. Never in the history of modern humanity we've had hundreds of thousands of people dying in front of our eyes. In the past, Assad's father did very similar things, but there was no 24/7 media. We didn't have social media. It's happening before our eyes. We're totally helpless. The Security Council, which is supposed to be ensuring peace and security in the world, is made up of 5 of the biggest arms traders in the world. So these are the people who actually, you could say, should be actually benefiting from having more wars, and they are the people for historical reasons who are now occupying those seats. And every time there is a resolution, which is against Assad and Syria, you can be sure that Russia and China will veto it. And every time there's anything which is holding Israel to account, the Americans will veto it. So this is the group who are supposed to be ensuring peace and security in the world through global cooperation. They are playing politics and they are playing profit. So I know Germany would like to get onto the Security Council, and hopefully that's a good thing. I mean, but our call, for example, in this situation is something very simple. So can we make sure that at least when you're dealing with atrocity crimes against humanity, genocide, in situations like this, that the permanent 5 members of the Security Council are not going to be able to use the veto. They should voluntarily refrain from using the veto, because the veto has now become a power game. So if you take the other, I'm thinking of conflict. Think of all the major issues which need global solutions. Conflict, whether it's Yemen, Syria, DRC, Burundi, it needs multilateral solutions, and we are nowhere close to that. You can be optimistic, pessimistic. The facts are in front of you. It's a conflict. Yesterday you saw the UNHCR figure, 65 million people internally displaced, over 20 million are refugees. It needs a global solution. Germany is the only exception in the Western Hemisphere to actually take in over 1 million people at great cost, political cost to the Chancellor here, But what are the others doing? I mean, Hungary, Europe as a whole is pushing people back into the waters. I mean, thousands have died in the Mediterranean, and we are discussing global cooperation. The Sustainable Development Goals, we've all signed it with a great flourish 3 years ago. I ran the campaign for the Millennium Development Goals of the UN with Kofi Annan, so I know what happens on the inside. What has happened 3 years later? I mean, the main refrain of the Sustainable Development Goals, what made it distinctive from the Millennium Development Goals, was the slogan, "Leave no one behind," which is fundamentally a question of identity and diversity. How do we leave the 1/3 of the population include them into the process. What has happened in practice? Can anybody say, in the countries which matter, Nigeria, in India, the big numbers are in those countries. Are we saying the sustainable development goals and an inclusive agenda of bringing the minorities, the Kurds, the Muslims, the indigenous people, the women into the forefront of the SDG process? Is that happening? I mean,
I think Nick has an answer to that.
Let's just hold on 1 second here. I mean, the Sustainable Development Goals, of which the Paris Climate Agreement is just one, Goal 13, I mean, it was December 2015. I mean, I don't know how fast you want things to happen, but I mean, of course, we'd love all the problems to be solved now, today, tomorrow, maybe Monday afternoon at the latest. But it was only December 2015. It seems a long time ago, but it's a year and a half. So, I mean, give it a chance, right? And we need Amnesty International, of course, to remind people of what's not working, right? But if we also don't remind people of what is working, then people are going to get even more pessimistic. Now, I want to come back on one point, though. One thing I do agree with you is there is a sense of anger in the world right now, which is a little bit different to certainly when I was younger. And I have 3 kids, 24, 22, and 20, and they are certainly less optimistic about the future than I was when I was 20, right? When I was 20, I wanted to get out there and have loads of fun. And they're very worried. Now, I think it's also true that in both the developing countries and the developed countries, increasingly in the developed countries now as well, there is a missing link of opportunity for people. And it's going to get worse if we don't get smart. It's going to get worse with robotics, artificial intelligence, lots of middle-class jobs will go out of work. The issue of employment is key. And whether, sustainable development and whether the climate change agreement will deal with these big mega issues and save our world from degradation, let's hope so. But what they're not going to do instantly is deliver the jobs that are needed and the sense of optimism among certain communities about the chance of a prospect for themselves and their families.
I don't want to take more airtime, but just the one point I want to make.
To respond to that, and then we'll go to Gonzalo.
My point really is that, so on the SDGs, of course, we're not expecting everything to change overnight, but in the countries where the difference can be made, are there concrete steps being taken towards leaving no one behind? I have not seen that. That's my point. But the main point really I want to make is it's the issue at this point in time is not about partnerships. The issue is about accountability. Mm-hmm. If there is no sign that our leaders, both in the private sector and governments, if there's no sign that they're being held accountable, people are looking for alternative routes. The mainstream systems are not holding them accountable. So either people are using bombs or they're creating, like South Korea, you have corrupt leaders. Millions of people go on the street and change the regime. Is that the only way to make change happen? Africa last year, across the world, 96 countries saw mass public protests, including Africa, teachers in Ghana. It's never happened historically. So I'm saying something's wrong and we can either explain it away, so we had the London fire, for example, and yes, people came out. I mean, I was there the last week. People came out to help the people who are suffering, and we can make a virtue out of that. But where is the government? What are they doing?
So let me pose that question to you, and just borrowing something that he said earlier, should we then rethink the organization and the structure of international institutions, and how do we bypass the question of self-interest? Because I think that's always going to be there.
Well, of course, we don't live in a perfect world. There's no such thing as a perfect world. And I have a saying. We have a saying in Portugal. I think it's very common for the other countries. Because one little bird died, that doesn't mean that the spring is over. And of course, it's exactly, we can apply to what you said. I mean, there are plenty of bad examples, plenty of cases that are not a success. But the truth is, we can't hide the truth, and we have to face them. But the truth is that there are a lot of good things happening. And like we said, I want to support what Nick said. I mean, it's a never-ending process. It's very, very challenging. It might take some more years to change habits, to change minds, to change cultures. But now we know where to go, and I think that's one of the biggest achievements. And let me also say something about Europe that you also mentioned. I mean, this is a little bit unfair. That's saying that Europe is not addressing correctly the fact that we are receiving. We are facing an enormous challenge regarding the migrants. This was very sudden. This was something that we were not prepared. Well, we can say that Europe took a long time to react. We can say that Europe didn't do everything correctly at the first time. Okay, I can live with that, but come on. Europe is doing a very good job regarding the situation. And of course, we've got countries that are more engaged than others. But like I said, that doesn't mean that spring is over. Nevertheless, for your specific question, I don't know. I mean, we have, once again, we have good examples of organizations that are dealing very well with the challenges. I don't believe on punishment. I don't believe on methods that use punishment. Let's punish this country because they are not using the right methods. I don't know if this is correct, because we should punish probably the politicians who are taking decisions by the citizens. But if we punish the country, it's the citizens, all the citizens that will suffer. I think this is pretty obvious. And in my humble opinion, this is not the way to get things on track. By using some kind of punishment, this will allow radicalism, and we need to avoid that. Of course, like I mentioned, it's a never-ending process. We've got this challenge every day. There is no such thing as one solution for all the problems. Once again, the European Economic and Social Committee, sorry to repeat this, it's a very interesting body that shows that it's possible to work together, employers, trade unions, NGOs, people with different interests in society. It's possible to work together. It's possible to bring out solutions and to bring out recommendations for European policy, not only regarding the sustainable development goals, but in every matter. And this might be, in my humble opinion, a good solution to engage the organizations of the civil society in order to engage the citizens even more, in order to bring out solutions that come to real life and to real people. I don't have a final solution for everything, for the global challenges, but if you use best practices, that might be interesting.
Engagement of citizens is an interesting point that you've raised. And Veronica, I just want to point this to you. You've said you've been in many countries, and I assume you're also working with people from the grassroots, as we like to call it. How do we embed this worldview in those levels so that, a village, for example, in Kenya is discussing what's happening in Syria and possible solutions there? Is this even realistic?
Well, I think it's a great question, because indeed, when in a business you want to be partner or champion for independent businesses, small businesses, family-owned businesses, not big corporations, but those who really give the bread and butter to the families. And they don't have corporate departments to deal with sustainable development goals. They don't participate in Dow Jones Sustainability Index reporting. For them, it's a matter of life.
Yeah.
And this is an area where, of course, there is a lot of communication necessary, but there is absolutely the understanding that without this cooperation, and I'm definitely not so negative or not so pessimistic as some of my fellow speakers here, because I can say that I've seen this happening. People are interested, they want to contribute. They know they are small, they know that probably they are not so well prepared with all the topics, but as they come to us as the big German metro, asking, okay, tell us, we see that you have some commitments. What does this mean for us? If you have a commitment for the top 80% of your fish to be sustainably sourced by, I don't know when, by 2020, by the way, what does this mean exactly? how can I contribute to that? Is there more business for me if I have my small fishery or I'm a small fisherman? So people make the link, and media plays a very, very important role there, because media helps them to understand that this kind of movement or this notion exists. So I think here the representative of Deutsche Welle has some job to do, or to further deliver on that job in a positive way. So I'm not so pessimistic. I think we've seen it in many countries, and we cherish it and we grow it with a lot of passion, because this is what our employees expect, this is what the society, the states where we work, the national states expect from us regulation, and this is at the end what our customers want. They want their local products, and they want them to be there not only this year but also in the next 5 or 10 years. So there is a framework, and the SDGs are a fantastic framework, because if you go through the Sustainable Development Goals and the sub-goals, you know exactly what you need to do. Mm-hmm. But we have to also translate it for the small businesses in a little bit more human language, otherwise it's difficult for them to grasp it.
So Nick, are we doing enough of this? Are we engaging enough in the grassroots? And are we using a language, as Veronica has said, which is digestible for all, so that it's not just global institution talk?
So are we using the right language? Probably not. We need to get, and we need to also not just use the right language, but also use the right languages. I mean, in India or something like that, there's like 40-odd languages, of which 20 plus are official languages. And we often, as a global institution, we talk in English, maybe Hindi, right? But we don't get down to the really local. What a wasted opportunity not to actually communicate in these different languages. And I think the other thing that's going on is that, you know, we live in a very complex world right now, whereby, I mean, when I was a kid, right, I knew all the top records in the English pop charts, right? And every single kid in my school ground knew exactly who was number 1 and who was number 10. Was it David Bowie or was it whatever, right? Now, my kids listen to all kinds of different kinds of music channels, and they sample all this and that. You can see Google, right? It chooses my football team, which is quite a small football team for me, when I go on every morning. And I think everybody's reading about my small football team because it's on the front page of Google News. But no, Google's worked out that I like that football team, so it's given me what I want. And that makes me nervous, that we live in a world where I think we're creating barriers sometimes in the way we communicate, in the media and other things, reinforcing prejudices here, confirming certain belief structures there. You know, I don't think we're breaking through in quite the same way we did even a few years ago, because there are so many multiple channels. As for just to finish on one issue though, the whole thing about the Paris Climate Change Agreement, why it worked was because it had governments and it had cities and businesses and states and investors aligning behind the aims and ambitions of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. It didn't really have the citizens. That makes me nervous, because politics will come and go, governments will come and go, but you know, over the long term, you need the public behind it. And the other final thing I would say is that the businesses and the cities and others are desperate to be part of the, in other words, the decision-making process of the implementation of the Paris Agreement. And they are closer now than they've probably ever been to the decision-making process. But governments still can't work out how quite to engage with cities, businesses, states, subnationals in a way that gives them a chance with the decision-making process as well. So in the UN system, it's still sovereign states, that's the way it is. And it's not up to me to change the rules of the game, but there certainly is a desperate interest of subnational governments, businesses and investors, of having a bit more of a say at the table. And maybe this will evolve over time.
All right, we've been talking about creating solutions to some of the problems that the universe is facing at the moment. Sally, you've been labeled as a pessimist of this panel. I think it's a title you've claimed. And I just wanted to find out from you, do you think we are approaching this the wrong way, where we're finding solutions to events that have already happened rather than looking forward and trying to preempt and prevent?
I mean, if we don't, first of all, acknowledge that we have a problem, we're never going to solve it, right? So I think the more we get around to coming to the fact that the current systems are not delivering, the quicker, because either you're going to, I always tell, like the Gulf states, the Bahrain, Qatar, etc., who are now going through a new drama right now. I always tell the leaders there that you have two choices. Either you can change and be ahead of the curve, including Saudi Arabia, or someone's going to change it for you. You have only two choices. I have no doubt that Saudi Arabia will implode. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So if you're an enlightened leader of Saudi Arabia, you move ahead of that curve. So I think all of us who are in decision-making positions, or we self-imagine that we are powerful, I think it's better for us to come to terms with that. So I mean, first of all, I want to kind of rebrand myself slightly in the panel, because it's an interesting situation. When Amnesty International was created, and the iconic logo of the candle with the kind of barbed wires around it. So I think it's originally a Chinese, paradoxically a Chinese proverb, I think, which said that you have two choices again. You either can curse the darkness or you light a candle. So Amnesty International's option was to light a candle. So I think there's a fundamental difference between, we are conflating two issues. I have huge faith and optimism in people's resilience to fight and to find solutions. I have no question. I mean, you take what happened in Burkina Faso. The youth of Burkina Faso stood up. You take a country like the Gambia, small country. If you had told me 5 years ago that Yahya Jammeh, who was obviously a complete lunatic, who was ruling the country for more than 20 years or 30 years, I don't know, who said he was speaking to God, he was curing AIDS, that regime changed thanks to ECOWAS and the youth of the Gambia standing up without a drop of blood having been spilled. You look at the bloggers of Zone 9 in Ethiopia who are continuing to blog despite all the challenges. And I can give an endless list of people standing up against all odds. But my question is, which means, have we given up on governments? Have we given up on the people who are legitimately supposed to be leading us? So we have to always find solutions around them. So I think that we cannot accept that. I'm not ready to accept that. Amnesty is not ready to accept that. The International Criminal Court, you're talking about global solutions. That was a global solution. And it is true that the ICC should do a lot more to go after non-African leaders. That's absolutely true. But our leaders in Africa, Asia, etc., they want impunity, right? So they're saying, let's pull out of that. And you have the challenge we have today is that in many of these countries, and let's not focus on the US and UK, which have become much more inward looking, but take Brazil, take India, take Nigeria, take South Africa, take Egypt, the largest countries in the world, the most powerful countries in the world. What is happening there? Are these people playing on the international stage? Are they putting forward an ethical to refugees? They are the pioneers in pushing people back into the water. Europeans only learned that outsourcing model from them. Now you're outsourcing to Turkey. They outsource to small island states. So, they don't even want the people to come into the land. They want them to be in, Manus Island and Nauru, in inhumane conditions. So if you think of all the global leaders right now, where is that Mandela? Who do we look for? If you don't look at Germany and Canada as two sort of shining exceptions, where are these global leaders? And I think we can fool ourselves that, and I don't want to be unrealistic and sound like some naive kind of, 16-year-old kind of thing. But the fact is we have to come to grips with it, and we have to address it and find solutions. And the solutions for us, for Amnesty International, the solution is very simple. You have to create a global people's movement which will resist this fight against humanity.
And how do we sustain momentum, Gonzalo? Because, it's a lot. It's almost like you make one step forward, as Salil mentioned, with the ICC, and then you take 2 steps back with an entire continent threatening to pull out of this Rome Statute. How do we maintain this momentum and stay rooted in global solidarity?
Well, you mentioned somehow there's a lack of leadership around the globe. You just mentioned 2 good examples. Well, the lack of leadership, it's also a matter of culture. We think that culture, giving people culture, literally teaching them, giving them education, it's a way to bring out the ability to fight against bad things, against the prosecution, people that want dictatorship, and all kinds of isms that we can address. Of course, once again, it's a matter of ages to get people more enlightened about what is really going on, and to get rid of people that are addressing dictatorship and addressing ways of managing a country without respecting any laws, any civil rights. It's a difficult thing. I'm probably be the realistic in this panel, but I'm also an optimist. This discussion will never end. I don't know if we have culture on society. If I really believe in this, I really believe that we need to promote education. We need to promote not the same level, that's impossible, but we need to engage the citizens with the challenges, and this will take many years, of course. Your proposal to get the same level of commitment, I think it's not only rhetoric, but it's difficult. It's difficult because the problems are quite different around the globe. But a starting point is to agree at least that culture, education, the basics, it's all it matters to grow, to get society more engaged and more participant to fight against this kind of discrimination.
Veronica, the issue of deadlines has been brought up, and when you look at, a lot of these goals that we've set for ourselves, usually it sounds like it's so far into the future, 2025, 2030. Are we setting ourselves up to fail because people have become apathetic? They don't think it will really affect them because it's not in the now?
Well, business takes in different lead times. So we are a stock-listed company. Every stock-listed company responds to quarterly reviews, to yearly reviews. So no one here, at least on the business side, can afford to have something which is only long-term without to report on the short-term progress. So short-term progress is important. And indeed, the Sustainable Development Goals were only confirmed in December, November 2015, but my feeling is that since then a lot of things have changed and have moved, especially on the business side. We will, for this year, we actually work on that to integrate in our reporting for the first time progress on Sustainable Development Goals. And I know already that we are not going to show most probably very, very big stories because the timing is short, but it's a signal. And it's a signal in the community. It's a signal also for us that we are serious about this commitment. Mm-hmm. And I very much hope that we'll be able to show more of that in the future. And there is no long-term success without short-term success. Therefore, the sustainable development discussion has to be in the regular conversations, in the politics, in the business, everywhere. We cannot say we have a commitment 2030 and we wait till the time comes.
Yeah, but
no,
earlier,
it works with plans.
Earlier I asked about review frameworks, and I just want to know from you if you think they are effective. The review frameworks that have been set by global institutions. So, for example, with the Paris Climate Agreement, that every 5 years they will convene and see how far we've come. Is that effective?
I can give you a different angle on that. We have a global target on deforestation. It's less than 1,000 days till then. And I can tell you, I feel that pressure on my neck, not because I feel that I'm globally responsible for the deforestation, but I know exactly what it means for our company, how to move there. So I think the framework is not bad. Probably they could be better, always could be better. But the truth is that the goals are quite ambitious. And we have put ourselves as a society, as media, as citizens, as business people, something really good on the table, and we have to deliver. That's it.
Okay. Yes, Nikki is going to say one thing, and I'm going to open the questions to the floor. Yeah.
One very, very brief thing. Today is the anniversary of the opening for signature in New York in 1992 of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. That was 25 years ago. This thing has not just been pulled out of a hat, you know, like in Paris in 2015. It's taken 25 years of blood, sweat, tears, misery, depression, occasionally joy, right, to actually move the world through the arguments of science, of economics, of social and moral imperatives, to get to the point where finally the world got to the point when actually we've got to do this, because if we don't do it, we're going to screw up our planet, and also we are going to kill our businesses, we're going to destroy our children's future. If we care about the moral stewardship of the earth, like the Pope and many religious figures outlined before Paris. So, you know, it's taken a long time of great leadership by many people, including NGOs like Amnesty International, to get the world to that point. And once it's got there now, whether one government pulls out at one time or another government pulls out in the future, or one government goes slow versus, if the overall direction of the vast majority of nations is now in that direction, it is irreversible and unstoppable. The only challenge now is, can it go fast enough? Because there's so much shit up in the atmosphere right now that if we don't hurry up and we ain't got a vacuum cleaner to take it out, right, then we're going to be in serious trouble with the temperature.
Okay.
But everything else has taken a long time to get there.
All right. I'll take the first three questions from the floor. Yep.
Hi, I'm Shahidul Alam, a photographer and a writer from Bangladesh. I take on board the comments made by Amnesty for a very specific reason. I'll give you a practical example. I run a media school in Bangladesh, and we have students from all over the globe coming. Australian students used to come on a regular basis. They recently stopped coming because Australia decided to send troops to Syria, and they no longer felt safe going to a Muslim country. So I look at this ridiculous situation, you know, you're going to bomb a country out there and then make the whole world unsafe for yourself. And you're actually deliberately doing it. I mean, think through this process for once. This entire thing is so convoluted. The fact that you're going to bomb the shit out of people at some places and then worry about what's going to happen afterwards. I mean, really, this needs to be thought out in some sort of detail. I come from Bangladesh, and I call countries like mine majority world countries. I don't like being called least developing countries or underdeveloped countries or any of that stuff. But when a farmer in my field discovers that a decision made by the G8 countries, which make up less than 13% of the world's population, affect their lives in such dramatic ways, and they in no way, either they or me, ever appointed these G8 people to be our representatives, but they end up making important decisions that affect our lives, we are very skeptical. Because at the end of the day, you know, apart from the United States, as was pointed out, which provides 51% of the world's arms, it is in the interest of the arms dealers of the world to perpetuate war simply because it's business, it's good business. The problem is, we end up suffering for it, and we are paying the shit because you happen to want to make money, and we're extremely skeptical. We end up doing lots of projects, we come up with lots of beautiful statements and whatever. Every time we analyze it and we come up with things which actually question the various agendas that we think are the problem, then we discover that all those words about partnership and wonderful things are happening are all fine until you begin to touch the fundamental interests of those countries.
Salil.
No, it's not a question, so I'm not answering a question. I just want to say that, you know, talking about international rules-based systems of operating, you'd have thought like something like the Geneva Convention. You know, there's some things which were, even if you're in a war, there are some rules of war. You know, that's international humanitarian law. You know, these things historically have been respected. Even when you don't agree with your enemy, there are some rules of war itself. in the last few years, what we've seen is that these have been now not just thrown to the wind, but bombing hospitals, schools, even funeral processions. I mean, it just normalized, and nobody says anything. I was going to say to Shahidul, I mean, I totally agree with everything you said, but unfortunately, you know, and I'm the first one to hold Western governments to account for, you know, for their double standards and the hypocrisy which we've seen enough of. You know, spouting human rights. You know, the Americans will spout human rights when it comes to you know, the countries they don't like. They will lecture them on human rights. When it comes to Saudi Arabia or Bahrain, you know, Saudi Arabia is bombing the hell out of Yemen. And who's giving them the arms? And why are they not being held to account? So we know that. But our own leaders, and since we are both from South Asia, I mean, what a mess South Asia is. That's where the majority of the world's population, China and South Asia account for pretty much 70% of the world's population. And take each of the countries in South Asia, you know, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, what a right royal mess. And each of these leaders, you know, they're fighting with each other to divide their societies even more. You know. This is like, you want like dividing champions, come to South Asia. Yesterday we had earth-shattering cricket match between India and Pakistan. I don't know how many of you know this game called cricket. It's a very special. Yeah, okay. Thanks to the British, we got this game. And that game, you know, like when India and Pakistan plays a Champions Cricket Trophy final, South Asia is kind of paralyzed. So it's just a game, but it's actually a proxy war, because actually we're fighting over Kashmir on that cricket pitch.
There's another question.
This is with Veronica. I'm asking about the very concept of corporate responsibility. It's a very fancy term with the corporations, but there is no unified mechanism as to how certain goals, which are very important for the world, could be achieved as through a collective effort of various corporations. Is there something real collective corporate social responsibility amongst the top earners of the world?
Veronica.
There is no one framework with fits all, and I don't like to say that this corporate social responsibility, because this corporate responsibility is beyond social, it's environmental, and you know best in environment and social, they are so interlinked. If you don't care of environment, it becomes social. If you don't become the social, it becomes environment, and so on and so on. There is a beautiful framework for all stock-listed companies called Dow Jones Sustainability Index. Every investor looks at that. But for those who are not stock-listed, there are other frames. The truth is that the money care. I don't know how many panels with banks over phone, over individual meetings I have done only in the last 6 months. And not because the money are so socially or corporate responsible to be not necessarily bad, but because they want to know, every investor nowadays wants to know how safe is your business, how much you take care of your business, and how much you take care that the business is consistent, sustainable, and will be sustainable also in the next decade. And I think it's a very healthy framework.
Okay.
And you can criticize it, but it's very efficient.
All right, Gonzalo.
Let me just add, thank you, Veronica, for pointing out the business, what business people are doing. I work for a company, and I represent the employers group in the European Economic and Social Committee. And of course, it's small steps. It's small steps to change the society, but we don't have that much examples of companies that are in the stock exchange market in New York or in Frankfurt or whatever. But by leading by example, by giving example on using these standards, high standards, using this ability to provoke changes on the workers, on the society, it can also be applied to companies, to regular companies that are not in the stock market. And this is, like I said, small steps. There's a baby here. That's lovely. Thank you. That's a message of hope. Thank you. I was trying to...
Disagreeing on everything we've said.
Yes, and
Disagreeing with everything.
is there anything more interesting than listen a baby crying? Thank you for coming.
Edith, can I just briefly comment on this corporate responsibility
I will
point?
allow you to do that, but first let's get a question from the gentleman there.
There's another one.
Oh, yeah, and then there's another one here. We'll take the three of them together, and then we'll answer the questions, and then we'll come to you too.
Baby is allowed. Yeah, baby is allowed to do something.
I strongly believe that not until there is a global consensus on dealing with crises across the world, we don't have solution. Like in the case of Syria, it's very sad that those who are supposed to take actions are watching that country annihilated. It is sad because of personal interest, because of economic interest. They are just allowing people to just die. But I think we need to speak out for those who are responsible for certain things to be done to ensure that sanctions are meted out to those who are defaulters. Because if we don't do that, we'll just be speaking, we'll just be talking, and we'll not have solution. I think the time has come for us to speak out as journalists collectively and say no to certain things. Because if we don't, posterity will hold us responsible. Thank you.
Thank you. We had a question behind.
Thank you. My name is Stefan Meyer. I'm an author. And I wanted to come back to the gentleman from Bangladesh who's running the school, saying that I am German, so I'm part of the 13 bad % you mentioned, like some other people here. But I think what is happening right now, and you see this on this panel as well, is that we are starting to understand that not only you are suffering today the conditions that we create, but that our children and grandchildren will pay the bill of what we do or don't do today. And I think that's an important point to understand that we're together in this.
Thank you very much. There was a gentleman behind there who I had promised.
Hello, I just wanted to ask a question about a statement that Gonzalo said. It was about that may be a solution to work on the education and culture of the people in order to have a better connected and consensus in the world. So if that will be the solution, how it can be possible? I would say that most of the leaders actually of many organizations are people that have been studied outside, abroad, connected actually with other cultures. So how can it be possible that you think that as a solution, if it is actually having problems because of that? I mean, is there an obstacle or any other solution? Or maybe in what sense do you mean that education could be a solution?
Okay, well, let me give you, can I
Yeah,
answer?
of course.
Let me give you the greatest example in Europe, Erasmus project. Erasmus project in the last 30 years have been changing people's minds. It's the best contribution for the integration of European values, European society. Of course, this is a very smart example. But it's like I said before, it's small steps to change the narrative. But regarding culture, for example, why don't we have? Well, everybody speaks about patriotism and nationalism. I'm a patriot. I'm a proud Portuguese. I'm a proud European. But I'm not a nationalist. And some of the nationalisms that we see around Europe might be could be avoided. For example, with culture, for example, by teaching European history in each member state. How do we get here? If we teach this of course, I'm not trying to avoid the history of each member state, for example, but trying to reach the young people as a seed investment and trying to enlighten them about the history of Europe. How did we get here? What took us here? What took us to this project of 60 years of peace, 60 years of growth, 60 years of integration? It's not a perfect project, but it's getting there. So that's what I was trying to mean as giving culture and education to the citizens, to engage them with a common history, with common values, to get better results. That was the idea.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. We have two people sat behind there who would like to ask questions, and one gentleman right in front of me.
Hi, I'm Rifat Javed from India. Thank you very much, for the 2 days of amazing discussions, discussing precisely what we all are suffering around the world. My question is for Salil. Salil, when you talked about the troubles that media fraternity is facing, you largely seems to have focused on, part of Arab world and Turkey. And I wonder if you are also aware of the, the difficulties of the hostility that we journalists are facing in India, which is not considered, widely considered to be in the same league as the African world, even though, the troubles that we are facing are very similar to the troubles that our colleagues would be facing in Zimbabwe, let's say. So for an example, in India, which has become quite a fashion now to call journalists anti-nationals if you happen to be critical of the government. And if you have a Muslim name like me, then you also get the additional adjective like jihadi. So I am jihadi as well as national, and my sin is that I, hold the politicians in power, to account. So I wonder, because I'm asking these questions because we have, friends from representing United Nations, we have a gentleman, sort of representing European Council. You are from Amnesty International. I just wonder, in the midst of that, our leader, touring around the world, on a frequent basis, do you also have India in the radar that there is a, sort of huge amount of atrocities going on, on journalists, so that there is an attempt to curb free press? Okay. And, is anything that you guys can do?
Salil.
I don't know if you know, but Amnesty International has been hounded inside India. We've had sedition charge attempted to be put on us. And by the way, I think this is a badge of honor. If the current government is attacking you, you should be proud. I always say that, if the governments of Hungary, Turkey, Egypt, all these countries attack, if they say something nice about Amnesty, I'd be very worried. That means we're not doing our job. So if you're treated as an anti-national, I think you must be doing something useful there. So I think we are in an era of hyper-nationalism. I mean, Amnesty, and I think there's a very sophisticated narrative on India which is being put forward before the world. And because we've had elections for a long time, somehow people think we're a democracy. So we are a long, long way from that. And I think any, observer who's looking beyond the headlines knows the truth, and you can't fool all the people all the time. So I think but we're very conscious of everything that you've said, and happy to talk to you offline. Which is actually specifically to support human rights defenders. And human rights defenders historically used to be NGO activist types, but now it's students, bloggers, journalists, lawyers, anti-corruption people, environmental defenders, they're all human rights defenders. So I want to just quickly comment on two other things on the corporate point. I think you may be aware that the Edelman, which is a global PR firm, has been doing for decades a trust barometer survey. And on the trust barometer survey, our leaders, whether from governments or corporate sector, have never had such low scores before. And this has not happened for no reason. And there's some amazing companies who are doing amazing things. There's no question about it. And Veronica, yours might be one of them. So it's not particularly focused on an individual company. But the challenge we have with the issue about standards and regulation is that companies have historically been quite hesitant to be regulated, and rightly so, because there's so many regulations and it's a nuisance. But the fact of the matter is that if we don't have binding standards, so we have the Ruggie principles, which is now the UN guiding principles, etc. You can have a lot of principles, codes of conduct, and standards like that. And the good companies who want to do the right thing will do it anyway on a voluntary basis. But the problem is the good ones are not so many in number, and the bad ones will not do it unless there's hard, non-negotiable, mandatory rules and regulations which are not voluntary.
All right.
Can I say something?
I
Where
really,
are the questions of the ladies? We need gender balance on the questions.
well, if you give me a chance, I will. There's a lady, Nick, I'll allow you to do that, but only after the questions. There's just so many of them. I think we should give them a chance. There's a lady sat behind there. I'm sorry, I really meant the lady behind you, but you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you very much. My name is Arfa Khanum, and I'm a journalist from India. I fortunately work with a parliamentary channel. I'm a broadcast journalist, and my question is very similar to what Rifat said, but I would slightly disagree with Salil on this. We might be proud of the fact that the government is taking on us, or they don't like our work and take it as a badge of honor, but then this actually functionally affects our work. There are a lot of journalists in India who are doing self-censorship. There are people women like me, who get threats, say, of murder, of rape, of coming for my family. In such circumstances, while I wear this as a badge of honor, how are journalists supposed to work freely? How are we supposed to ensure free press in India and entire South Asia? And then these are those journalists who speak, say, for the people who do not really have a voice in India, like Indian minorities, farmers, laborers, tribals, Dalits. So then, particularly now, the media houses are also very hesitant or even hiding these journalists. So at the end of the day, these journalists become unemployable, and they become at the mercy of, say, of other people. So they become all the more vulnerable then for the government to take on them. So I think it's a very sorry state of affair, and me saying this on an international platform, this would be, again, taking as something like a highly anti-international act. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your statement. I'll take the question at the back. I'll come to the gentleman at the front and the lady here.
Hello, my name is Shama Ramani. I'm from the United Nations University. My question is for all the panelists. I come back to the original title of the session. I believe it was how powerful are the powerful, what are the limits of international cooperation. We have heard a variety of views ranging from governments to babies. Now, coming back, my question is this. To have a takeaway, because I'm confused now. So I would like to ask you all, what do you think are the possibilities for international cooperation? That is, can you name precisely one or two milestones that we are likely to achieve in the coming years that make a positive transformation? I was curious. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I'll allow the panelists to do that as we wrap up the conversation. But before that, I'll give the chance to the two people who are sat in front of me.
Thank you. My name is Syed Haider. I'm from 7 News, Pakistan. I have a question to Salil. You have mentioned a lot of things which are really ground facts and the world is facing. And you know that conflicts are today a product. They are not happenings. And the peacekeeper nations, they are earning from the conflicts. And all the conflicts being solved in the peacekeepers nations countries. But the existence of the countries where the conflicts being happened, like the third world countries, they have no existence in the solutions. And the question is also to you about, you have spoken about the crimes of the Saudi Arabia. Because we highlight always what Assad is doing, what the other dictators are doing, Robert Mugabe is what is doing. But why the international media is not highlighting the crimes of Saudi Arabia? Because Saudi Arabia is the father of the IS, Al-Qaeda, and all the terrorist organizations. Now the Qatar has got the conflict with the Saudi Arabia, and the things are coming, being revealed that the Saudi Arabia is the most criminal state in the world. The people in the Saudi Arabia, they are facing a lot of problems. I don't know why the Amnesty International is not doing anything for the people in Saudi Arabia, in Qatif, Dammam, and Khobar. The people are facing how much the terrorist actions from the Saudi regime, rich regime, they are facing. So it's a question why the international media is hiding the crimes of Saudi Arabia.
Salil.
Well, happily, There are some countries in the world where they don't allow us in. They even block our website. Saudi Arabia is one of them. I think I spoke about, the many challenges with Saudi already, so I don't want to repeat all of that, and the double standards of the Western powers because they own the oil. I mean, and it's the same now even with China, when Western countries who lecture about human rights all over the world, given the trade realities now, the conversation with China is completely different. So, they will say, no, we cannot raise issues with China publicly, we will ask them privately. So it's moved to the back room, and then from the back room it moves into disappearance. But several of you asked questions on conflict, and I want to just touch on that issue, and you, our brother from Africa, also mentioned this. So I think the one very important thing to realize or to remember is that a lot of these conflicts are preventable at an early stage. So, like the situation in Syria, when the peaceful protest started in Aleppo, Amnesty and many others said, that Assad cannot crush this with the military. You listen to the people of Aleppo, maybe you don't agree with all of that. Take Nigeria, the northeast of Nigeria. We now talk about Boko Haram in very negative terms, rightly so, because they cause war crimes. But many people forget that when Boko Haram started, it started as a peaceful protest, and the north of Nigeria has been historically neglected. You may not agree with their, claims on Sharia, etc., but it was peaceful nevertheless. So my point is that early warning system is human rights violations, and you can pick it up and you can deal with it early. Then at the next stage where you're trying to broker peace, etc., it's much more complicated. But what is the solution? Regional level institutions, if you take Venezuela, say OAS, the solution is to throw Venezuela out. How is that going to find an answer to it? Similarly, the AU, whenever we have peace issues, solutions are very few and far between. And that's why I said Security Council reform is long term, it's going to take 50 years. But one concrete thing we can do now is to deal with the use of the veto. And that is something which I think we should all push for. They should be voluntarily asked to not use the veto when it comes to situations like Syria or, war crime situations.
And the final question from the lady in front of me.
Thank you so much. I am very impressed by the panelists and the moderator, of course. My name is Irene Hell. I am a reporter. I work for Newsweek and various other media outlets globally. And I run a media NGO called Friends in Media. And I want to take the opportunity to thank Mr. Nuttall for putting together the climate treatment. Well done, don't give up. And I want to also highlight the work of Amnesty International, you in the crossfire, and saving many, many lives, and one of the last voices of really humanity in the world. And also Metro is doing exceptional work with sustainability, reducing food waste, your fishery projects are outstanding. And I want to give you an idea. And I would really love to hear your input. We're here at Deutsche Welle. Deutsche Welle is one of the last resorts of credible journalism globally in the US, and this might be a reason why the climate treatment is now in danger in the US. 700 newspapers died. And would you welcome an idea of a global media fund where the companies who are committed, the governments, all governments of the world, like the UN, putting a budget in to cover, let's say, the work of Amnesty International or the work of all other UN goals, the climate progress done in climate deals, climate achievements, to get the tone of the press away from this big, terrible headline that the US now quit climate agreement towards thousands of initiatives who are working. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll ask my panelists now to, very briefly, because I can see the time is ticking, people's stomachs are rumbling, to give us the possibilities, as the question was asked. What can the way forward be, very briefly?
Well, for you, I can give you the example of green energy, the production of green energy. I think that's a valid goal, and I think all the globe has been performing in a very interesting way. and also, well, it's quite easy, and also the food waste, the reutilization of products, the circular economy. That is something that is going on, and I think it's two good examples for you as a message of hope.
Veronica.
I can probably elaborate on that, because this year in Europe the focus on circular economy is very visible, and this is a perfect platform for joint cooperation. And if there is a takeaway for you, the circular economy should be one, and the waste is an element of the circular economy, although food waste not necessarily. Another very important area of cooperation where we cannot go without many players or many stakeholders, and it's absolutely urgent, and it was also visible in New York 2 weeks ago, are the topic of oceans. We all live from the energy, from the climate regulation effect of oceans, from the food coming from oceans. We are polluting the oceans with incredible speed, and it is linked to the circular economy, but it could be a takeaway for you to say there is definitely social, environmental dimension there, where there is also commitment also from many stakeholders to do something together.
Right.
And of course, I believe the journalists take it also in their agendas with the respective level of interest.
Nick.
Yeah, so I think cooperation is going to happen only when national governments feel it's in their own national interest to do certain things. I think that's why we have a Paris climate change agreement, because finally they all woke up to realize it probably was in their best national interests. I think there will be some key milestones. You mentioned renewable energy and other things coming up, and I think that we will achieve over the next 30 or 40 years the aims and ambitions of the Paris climate change agreement. But what I would also say is I think we're in a very, very risky moment in the history of the world. We're in a risky moment because everything we've done on environmental sustainability has come very late, and we're well behind the curve. We're in a risky moment because we're seeing technological transitions about to come, which I just mentioned before, and you've all heard about them. Robotics, artificial intelligence, basically risking putting lots of people out of work, even well-educated people. And I think we're at a risky time because the geopolitics are shifting so fast around the world that nobody knows who's running the show anymore. And nobody knows what those with the new geopolitics will do with it. And I think the final point I'd make is, I'm trying to wrap up some of these comments here, which is we're all looking at our countries through very different lenses. There's so many journalists here looking at the issue of human rights and the issue of journalism and whether they can report in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh. And yet, you know, I look at my piece of paper and I say, my God, the Modi government is putting in more solar power than ever in the history of India, right? It's an amazing number of megawatts. So which one do we like? We like the megawatts, but we don't like the other one, yeah. So again, we've got different lenses on what's happening in some of these countries. Yeah.
All right, Salil.
Thank you. I think that, you know, the takeaway for me, I mean, somebody asked for a takeaway. I think the takeaway for me is that despite the bullets, the bulldozers, the bombs, the handcuffs, the prison bars, which, you know, people are put behind, the tear gas, I think people, journalists, will always stand up. That is irrepressible. Freedom of expression can never be muzzled. You can try to push for censorship or self-censorship, but in the end, truth and justice will always prevail. We don't need another framework. I mean, I think Srimani asked, do we need a framework? What's it concretely? I think the Sustainable Development Goals agenda is fine. It's not a problem with the agenda. It just needs to be implemented and enforced. I mean, Goal 16 talks about, you know, justice and institutions. If Goal 16 doesn't work, none of the other goals are going to work. And you talk about member states coming together and representing their own interest. But the question is, who are these people who are representing these member states? Who do they represent? You know, so we have now elected dictators. In the past, Amnesty had to deal with dictators who were illegitimate. The situation in Philippines, in Turkey, in Hungary, these people are elected. In fact, the more they oppress the minorities, the more they get popular. Like Putin's popularity rating is at 70 or 80%. So, not suggesting that he's an elected dictator, but I think we can be always hopeful. I absolutely don't want us to leave feeling hopeless.
Oh,
certainly
good.
the people here.
Leave feeling hopeful. To my panelists, thank you very much for the engaging dialogue. To the audience, thank you, and lunch is ready. We're armed with hashtags. Where I come from, respect for authority almost silenced us. See, we're taught from a very young age never to speak back to elders, and especially those in positions of influence and authority. But this is changing, and that's all thanks to social media. There's a young generation of Kenyans who are using this space as a safe place for dissent. Young people like me are watching in real time how the world around them is surprisingly similar and using online spaces to create global conversations. I remember hearing about officials in our sports ministry allegedly misappropriating funds meant for our Olympic athletes. Young Kenyans, armed with nothing really but hashtags, took to Twitter and Facebook, and they made their voice heard. It was a perfect example of brotherhood, nationalism, and a call for accountability, 140 characters at a time. It's really important for me to listen to these emerging voices of this young continent and tell their stories. My name is Edith Kimani, and I work at DW.
Hello, everybody. Enjoy your lunch. There are 2 buffets, one in the restaurant and one on the Rhine level in front of room Addis Ababa. And remember to get connected with the conference app. Enjoy your lunch and see you again at 2:30.